Dean, great. There's a few people still trickling in from the demonstration out there. What do you guys think of the demonstrations? Was that interesting? Some good conversations? What we would like to do is put on a workshop this spring that is nothing but tools. So how are people using technology to answer some of these tricky questions? So some of that stuff you saw today we will bring back. We'll try to figure out how to do it so that it's live streamed so you don't have to come here, and get some of those great ideas shared. So a lot of powerful information out there in the lobby. Alrighty, we're going to move on to NEPA planning. Woohoo! Woo! Did you hear that? There's woohoos. NEPA rocks. These guys all showed me their arm tattoos, so I know they're qualified to talk about NEPA. They got the triangle on the back of their hand, I think it is, stamped. So we felt it was important to have a discussion as part of this of how does landscape ecology and the thinking about a landscape scale fit into the whole NEPA process? Because if you do a word search on our NEPA manual, you will not find landscape ecology in there anywhere. It's not a dictated thing. So how does it fit? So these folks up here at this table are going to answer that specific question for you. So today we have Suzanne Schindler, who's a planner on the Willamette National Forest, Darren Gooding, who's on the Okanagan-Wenatchee Forest. Bill Conroy is supposed to be here, but he seems to be missing. Bill, are you in the room? Okay, Bill, if you're out in internet land, you missed it. You misunderstood the email. Marcy Anderson, who is acting R6 Administrative Review Coordinator. That sounds like fun. She's smiling. She's a woman you should get to know. And Carrie Spradlin, who is on the Northwest Forest Plan core team as a forester. So I'm going to turn it over to them for the next 40 minutes or so. Go ahead.
All right. Okay, thank you, Cheryl, for introducing each of us. And I have to say, I think I might be a poser because I have not been a planner for most of my career, nor I'm still labeling myself as a forester, so I'm kind of posing, but I'll do my best. The first thing we're going to do is just give a little primer review on the NEPA triangle, or for some of us, an introduction. So, Marcy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
So, who has not seen this thing before? Anybody? It's okay, you can raise your hands high. It's okay to say you don't do NEPA. It's all right. Okay, so for most of this is review, but just a quick rundown of the NEPA triangle. This is basically the way we do things in the planning world. The left-hand side of the triangle is pretty much pre-NEPA. It's where we figure out what it is we want to do, why we want to do it, where we want to do it. It's how we look at our land management plans and determine what our existing condition is relative to those plans and what we want to do to bring our landscapes closer to the plan objectives. The right side of the triangle is where we actually do our NEPA process. We do our analysis, we interface with the public, we generate a draft decision, we go through an objection process. Eventually we make the decision. There on the bottom is where we implement our project, we monitor our project, we figure out what works and what didn't, and then we start all over again. Make sense? That's how it works.
All right, we're just going to start off by each of us, well, maybe each of us, whoever wants to share how we are applying landscape ecology now in a current project or in a recent project, and kind of what the purpose and need is and how landscape ecology fits into NEPA for us right now. So, Suzanne, you want to start?
Sure. Hi, so I'm Suzanne Schindler, the forest planner on the Willamette National Forest, also the NEPA coordinator. And I've been in this position for the last 10 years and been planning before that. And, what I was going to talk about is for the Willamette, we have a range of how we use landscape ecology in our analysis. And so what I'm going to start with is how we use landscape analysis in our large or complex projects, and then talk about how we use a portion of that or a smaller analysis for our simpler or less complex projects. And so the first one I want to talk about is the Young's Rock Rigdon project, which Jane and Alan are going to talk about next. And that is one of our complex projects. And this analysis involved a full IDT and a collaborative, and it took over a year to do, and they covered over two fifth field watersheds, so about 200,000 acres. So, well, Jane will correct me. She has more precise information, but anyway, so that's our large-scale landscape analysis, and what that does is it focuses on what's unique in the landscape and how we can develop our purpose and need from what's going on outside and in the forest. And then we step that down, we do an internal landscape analysis for our 3D project, and 3D is composed of 3 different districts, the Mackenzie River, the Sweet Home, and the Detroit district. And so we're doing a smaller internal analysis where we're actually doing resource stories, and we share after field or some background information we gather, we share with each other, and we do like a team teach. And from there, they develop, what's unique, what's important for their resource, and they share that with each other, and so that gives us a background on what we want to do, and it feeds into our purpose and need and our proposed actions. The next smaller planning areas are less complex. Our landscape analysis uses existing information or is issue-based analysis. So some of our landscape analysis, of course, we look at our watershed analysis. For the Willamette, we did over 24 watershed analysis, and we updated about 8 of them. And those are on our website. So they're really good for current condition. They're a little bit out of date, but they are a good baseline for what's going on in the watershed. We also do, since then, we've done proposed or restoration action plans. So for watershed, we looked at, in 2009, fifth field watersheds, and then we updated that in 2010 and 15, we did watershed condition framework analysis. So those, were focused looks at the watersheds across the forest, what needed restoration, and we had action plans, and we have gone through those and done projects based on that information, and that fed to our purpose and need again, and proposed actions. And we heavily rely on our Northwest Oregon Ecology Group for our analysis for specific issues. In addition to Jane Curtis, we use Steve Acker, and then Doug. I mean, it's a great group and a great resource for us. One example is the deadwood analysis. So Steve did that for the forest, and we use that in our snag and downwood analysis. And that's usually done at a fifth field and using GNN data. And the wildlife biologists use this information in determining effects of proposed actions on species that rely on the deadwood, and then also to evaluate the need to create deadwood. So they're important analysis. Steve has also helped with the riparian reserve analysis, another hot issue that's going on in the forest. We've had quite a few field reviews with Brett trying to develop what we want to do or not do in the riparian reserves. And so this analysis helps us look at the landscape and where, like, for example, we want to develop hardwood species, so you look at the lower elevations. And another thing tying back to what Dee Dee talked about is riparian reserves, how they connect across the watershed, and like for terrestrial amphibians. So then dial that down some more, forest staff, our wildlife biologists work with the region, and for the red tree vole high priority site analysis, we're doing that in the Youngs Rock Rigdon project. And then generally we use LiDAR across the forest. That's really helpful to us. We do some pre-survey analysis for where are the roads, maybe where are some landforms or unstable landforms. And now we're initially using LiDAR to help us identify RA32 or complex or old growth across the forest. So that's sort of a rundown on how we use it.
All right, thank you. Darren, what do you use landscape ecology, or how are you applying it right now?
Well, since I'm going to also talk again in an hour, I'm going to be a little bit careful about not duplicating myself. So you might hear some of the same things come out of my mouth a couple times. So I guess that's good for repetition. So you'll hear more about, I won't go into it because we'll cover this in about an hour when James and I, my area ecologist here from the Okanagan-Wenatchee and for the Eastern Washington, we're going to present together. So we'll talk a little bit about we have the forest restoration strategy for the Okanagan-Wenatchee. So we have that document that lays out, we'll talk about that a bit more. I won't go into that right now as far as the details about the steps for that plan to go through that restoration strategy, but I'll just talk about a couple of projects that we used it in. One, I'm going to talk about the Upper Wenatchee pilot project in our main presentation, but another current project that we're using that for was the Monash-Tesh-Tatum resilient landscape. It actually is a larger all hands, all lands project because it's a bunch of where there's lands, the Forest Service land, there's Nature Conservancy, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Department of Natural Resources all have ownership in this area. And so there was a landscape evaluation done for that the entire landscape. And then we did for the Forest Service portion, there's about a 21,000 acre project area. It's another little bit of a creativity project for us. It's also a contract NEPA. It's one of the first, probably is the first larger scale contract NEPA that we did on our forest. So we like to try to mix it up with trying out some different things. So that was a new thing for us to do, contract NEPA. So in order to work through that, the need for the actions in that project were based on looking at the current versus desired conditions of the resources within the project area. The proposals were developed in cooperation with the collaborative. That's part of the south half of our forest, so it's the Tepish Collaborative. So we used information from photo interpretation, field recon, and the results from the landscape evaluation to compare existing to desired conditions. And then that information was then used to identify vegetation, wildlife, and aquatic restoration needs in the project area. Another thing that we used that was for us because of the nature of that landscape, it's a heavy motorized recreation area. It's a high use area in the state of Washington, and so we actually we're using human ecology mapping actually as another part of that project too, to look at where people were, to help identify the hot spots for where people are recreating, to look at, to help integrate that into the project proposal. So.
All right. And I'll just share briefly kind of where I've used landscape ecology and planning in the past. So I mostly worked on the east side of the region and applied landscape ecology principles to restoration projects. So medium and large scale restoration projects on the Umatilla and the Fremont-Wainema National Forest. So, and a lot of that is looking at forest structure, right? Because we're under east side screens, and so we're needing to analyze projects to figure out, okay, do we have enough old forest as compared with reference conditions with HRV? And so I've spent a lot of my career doing that. And most recently working on the bioregional assessment of the Northwest Forest Planning area. It's outside of the Northwest Forest Plan. It's a larger area. But we're, of course, using landscape ecology to inform the bioregional assessment, which is not a planning document, but it's going to help inform some of those planning documents to come of trends regionally, the ecological needs that are out there around habitat, forests, grassland, trying to get a big picture. So that's at a really broad scale. So anyway, Marcy, I'll let you go to question 2.
All right, so I'm going to provide you some context for the next question. Back in April was when I started my new job at the regional office, and I started as the regional EADM coordinator. Has everybody heard of EADM or EADM? Yes? Anybody haven't? All right, cool. Just in a nutshell, it's our national effort to become more efficient as an agency. EADM stands for Environmental Analysis and Decision Making, and it's our effort is to make those processes more efficient. So in April, when I started in that job, and I came from a forest environmental coordinator position on the Ochako National Forest. When I started that job was right at the same time as we had our regional environmental coordinator meeting at the regional office. We spent an entire afternoon talking about EDM and efficiencies and talking about our barriers to efficiency. We went through a whole bunch of people just kind of said what they found as problems for them. And then we did a really deep dive scientific process at the end where we put all these things up on flip chart paper and put little colored circles next to the ones that were the biggest problem for us. And one of the ones that rose to the top was the fact that as an agency, many forests were finding that we're not spending enough time on the left side of the NEPA triangle. So if you remember, that left side of the NEPA triangle is where we determine what it is we need to do, where we need to do it, and why. A lot of forests express frustration with the fact that we're going from planning area to planning area to planning area without really having a grounded reason for doing it. And then we sort of use the tools that we have to derive a purpose and need within that pre-established planning area. But we're really in there because it's just that one's turn in the planning cycle. So we determined that there's probably a need to do more landscape level assessments to determine where our real needs are in the landscape. Then, as we presented this to our leadership, leadership was more inclined to think we're doing too much of that kind of thing. Doing all this pre-assessment work is not efficient. So that was the rub. And the next question for our, our panel here is, how do we use landscape ecology to better develop or support our purpose and needs? And how do we find efficiency in doing the work up front to tell us where we need to go next, rather than going where we need to go next and doing the work after the fact?
I'll take that. I'll take that. I'll go with a couple of things. I'll go with a couple of that for that. So, and we kind of thought about this. This was actually a question that's kind of thought of about during the development of the forest restoration strategy, which for us includes obviously doing that landscape evaluation. And so we'd actually identified some things that why is it better? What does this get us to do this landscape evaluation to spend this extra time ahead of time? And it's for one is that that I have written down that I wrote down here is that purpose and need statements and proposed actions could be better supported with that landscape and patch level information, which then should result in fewer misidentified proposed treatment acres and mistreatment opportunities, and also improving the layout of those opportunities just by actually spending that extra time doing that and identifying that. Another thing is just it allows for better integration between resource special disciplines, which then you hope then would help to reduce conflicts between resources, and also help to build a higher level of ownership in the restoration projects by taking that approach. And then one other thought is just that there's the potential there, depending on how you structure your planning effort, is that you could easily then with each landscape evaluation, you have the potential then to do multiple project decisions based off of that, depending on how you put that together. So there's some starting thoughts there.
Yeah, I think you covered a lot of it. So it is, I think, a mix of what you're trying to do out there on the landscape. And I guess I always sort of frame it in, depending on how complex your planning area is, how much work you need up front. And, I can say is that rigged-in project, when we talk about that, that'll, like, that really is going to help our planning in the future for that area, because they did one landscape analysis and they're going to have multiple projects come out of that. So we see that as an efficient process. For our smaller or less complex projects, like what we do is we do what is the issues, what are our publics interested in, what do we need to know that we don't know. So, we work with our ecologist, we work with our different resources, and develop some sort of analysis that helps us. So I think that's pretty much how we manage it. And some projects are very simple. Some are, just using the tools. I know that Willamette's also developed the tools group, so they have a whole array of tools they use in our planning process. So I think we actively look for ways to help our analysis include ecology and sort of balance our management, direction and our targets that we need to do so that we can benefit the ecology. I mean, a lot of that also is infrastructure management. We have had a big focus on closing roads. When we first started, we have so many roads. So some of it is also managing what we have out there and what we need and what needs to get fixed. So it's a balance between how we can benefit the resources and also make the forest more functional in the long term.
I'll add on my thoughts. So I think that between the rub between the ECs and management, EC saying, hey, we may need more landscape assessments, and management saying, maybe we don't need that. Go figure it out with what you have. I think that they're probably both true. And I'm thinking of the differences also that we have within the region between our driest, most fire frequent forests and portions of forests and our more west side, very wet forests or fire infrequent forests. We have alignment with a lot of our very broad landscape scale assessments on the east side. And so it kind of is, if you're on a forest where that, the Columbia Basin Assessment and the Restoration Needs Assessment, they're all telling you very similar things in regards to vegetation and disturbance regimes and that kind of thing. So it may be that no matter where you pick on your forest or on your district, that the purpose and need is going to be very similar, because these broad landscape assessments and restoration needs are showing you, okay, well, yeah, there's too many trees and they're too close together, and broadly, generally, well, maybe we need to make that connection. And I feel like probably that's what's happening in some places, is that the information is out there, but we're not making the connection between what is there for the landscape scale assessment and our projects, and the prioritization of where those are and the details maybe of how that connects. So I think what we could probably do there is make better connections. I think it is different, more so, especially within the Northwest Forest Plan area, and it gets a little more complicated, and socially it's more complicated, right? There's less alignment with our collaborative groups and the science, and our needs assessments are there. It's just a little messier. So I think we do need a little more help there in figuring out, okay, for this forest that has maybe a much bigger mix of disturbance agents or ecosystem types, is not as simple as it is for some other forests at this moment in time. Not saying that it's simple, but that at this moment in time, because of where we are socially and where we are just ecologically, we kind of know what we need to do. But there are other forests where we definitely need help, and I think delineating where that's true and where it isn't is going to be helpful for making things go a little bit more quickly.
All right, I'm going to just add a little bit more, and bear with me because I came here prepared to ask the questions, but not necessarily to answer them. But another thing that I've been thinking about, especially today listening to some of these great tools we have available to us, is that we have a couple of situations here in Region 6 and probably nationally that we have a lot of forests who are revising their plans or have newly revised plans. We have a lot of forests who are still operating under plans that are 25, 30 years old. So I think efficiencies in particular can be gained for those forests that don't have current plans to have current, good, best available science helping refine purpose and needs and help inform how plans need to be modified in the near term until those plans can be revised. That's my 2 cents.
Okay. I'm just checking the time here. The next question that we wanted to discuss was that landscape ecology tells a story that it is all lands, and it crosses administrative boundaries. And we just wanted to kind of share some thoughts or ask the question of how do we connect that story of landscape ecology with, as Marcy said, we have some human-created constraints, either our forest plans or our political boundaries, or just other planning constraints. Maybe there's social acceptance constraints. So we have a lot of these tools and a lot of research that tells us where we should go, right? And it's the planning team's job to try and match that up with what we're given sociopolitically, and just wanted to get some perspective on how we do that, or the problems that arise, and where we maybe need to be thinking a little more about how to bridge that.
Well, I guess I could start this time. So it is sort of like what was talked about earlier. I really liked the discussions this morning because it was a building block to how we manage. You know, it's a big puzzle piece where we have a lot of direction, we have a lot of old direction, and it's gotten to the point where there's workarounds that I forget that I'm working around. You know, it's like, where does that come from? You know, but you know, on the one hand, we did a needs assessment with our program managers, and of our forest plan, it's like, what is out of date? What needs to be fixed? There's a lot of things, but over time, we already found a lot of answers to these questions, and we've developed new models, and our new folks coming in have developed ways to address what needs to get fixed, which, you know, is good, but of course, it would be nice to have a new forest plan. And then you couple that with what the landscape needs as well. You know, what's going on, what's important, what can we enhance, you know, and sometimes those conflicting resources to get some of those restoration needs done. I know that recently, the last couple big projects we've been doing is watershed or floodplain restoration. And so that's sort of a little bit outside the Willamette's Bailey work, but we've found ways to do that work. And a lot of it is going with the public and getting support, working with our collaboratives, and really has been a model how we get things done outside our main planning goals for our forest. And so a lot of it has to do with fundraising and getting our public on board for that. And we've done some really wonderful projects. And so that's the example that I've seen that's sort of been outside of what we have been doing. And I see more of those type of projects on our forest.
So I guess I'll start off on I can say at least about social license for one thing, at least for our forest. That's something that we're pretty fortunate to have we have 2 primary collaboratives on our forest. We have the Tepish Collaborative on the south half, and then we have the North Central Washington Forest Health Collaborative on the north and central portion of our forest. And without those 2, the support of those collaboratives and the partners that are part of those collaboratives, we would not have the ability to do, even think about doing some of the things that we want to propose in projects if it wasn't for having that social license. So I certainly recognize that other forests are not always as fortunate to have that. I think also the mantra, I know I've been trying to spread, and a few other people in our office have been, is like the whole thought about doing what's right for the landscape. That's really what we have to do with the landscape. By doing that landscape ecology and doing that big picture look is like, we need to always come back to that. We need to do what's right for the landscape. Don't just eliminate things that you see from looking at the ecology. Don't just discount those things that need to get done just because it may seem difficult to get through the planning process, because perhaps most of us have old plans, so you have those challenges of having old forest plans and those type of things. But always try to think about because you have that information, always try to think about do as much as you can for what needs to get done on the ground. Another thing for integration with partners, with our 5-year plan, with those where we've done those landscape evaluations, we're fortunate also, I guess, for the Eastern Washington, with the Department of Natural Resources for Washington, developed the 20-year forest health strategic plan for Eastern Washington. And so as much as possible, we've been working with where our 5-year plan aligns with their plan to look for those consistency and those efficiencies of where we can do work in the same landscapes, so that we're not over here and they're over here and we're not being efficient. So coming back to the whole shared stewardship presents opportunities for work together for G&A opportunities, all those type of things, trying to roll that into this too. So.
Okay. One of the things that Marcy and I were chatting before we got up here, and I was noting that, what we heard this morning was complex, right? Landscape ecology is complex, and I wrote it down in my notes, and I think Cheryl said something about messiness, right? It's messy. And I think that transitioning, and Tom DeMeo started to do this of, we're in this position where we need to take all this information and these concepts and kind of put them through the sieve of NEPA, which is really, right, we're doing analysis, and part of that is public engagement, and being able to communicate complex issues, not only with the public, but like within our planning teams, with our collaborative groups, with our collaborators and partners. And I think a big piece that we need to be thinking about is like roles in who's doing that connection between the complexity and the planning. And it's not always the planner, because they're doing their expertise maybe in other places. So I was just curious for other folks up here, who you see in your role as the planner, who you see making those connections with landscape ecology and bringing that to your teams.
I mean, I see the rangers doing a lot of that. They go to a lot of these watershed meetings. I see our program managers that go to a lot of these meetings and making those connections. And I think those are probably our main ones. I guess that's, what do you see?
I think some of it also is beyond, sometimes just our internally, our specialists try to make that,
Yes,
try to work to
definitely.
do those, because some of our specialists have developed relationships with some of our partner organizations, and so that helped to draw them into, which that was one thing part of the Upper Wenatchee project, which I'll talk about more a little bit about that in a little bit, about having them, because we had a couple of work groups in that project with a terrestrial and an aquatics work group, and then there's members from that. Those work groups got involved earlier in the process, so it was that was a way to get that, pull them into that.
Yeah, I think I agree with both of you. I also think we could be doing a lot better. We have so much turnover in this agency. We have so many new people coming in all the time. There were tools that were talked about this morning that I've never heard of, and I've been in the game for 25 years. So it would be great. I'm going to put this out to everybody here in the room and out in the atmosphere who are listening to this, that we need to be doing a much better job at communicating the tools and information to the people that need to hear it, because there's some great stuff going on that could be widely applied.
Yeah, and kind of just comparing Marcy and I's experiences this morning, and I said, okay, well, I've seen and I had seen and heard of all the things that I had that were presented this morning, which was great. But I'm a silviculturist, and I've worked on planning teams for many years. So okay, that makes sense. I should have heard of all of this, but we just started thinking. I also depend highly on the ecologists and the ecology group, and thinking about the number of people that actually make those strong connections and build those relationships with our research partners, and can really get into the science and interpret it in a way that we can then apply it. I think we are very limited with those folks, whether those are wildlife biologists or silviculturists or ecologists, with some years of experience that can, or not even years of experience, but just even the background and time to make that connection. I think we're missing that, or it could be strengthened. We have it. We have an incredible ecology group in Region 6, and now working on the bioregional assessment, I see how it's reemphasized to me how valuable and unique that is nationally. So give them kudos for that program, but also sometimes it feels like it's like a tether for a forest or a district. There's that one person in the ecology group that knows how to apply the science, and maybe nobody else knows. So I think that's an area where we have some weaknesses that we could potentially, we could grow, and I'm not sure how to do that, but I see it as a need. If anybody has a question, we have a couple of minutes. Or just a comment.
What kind of training do you see that we need to have? I mean, we do have a lot of turnover that comes in, and are we getting that training out to the people who are new and even some of the people who may not have come, even though they've been here for a while? How do we do that?
She was asking, so what training do we see out there? Are people getting the training to make that connection, or what do we need to do about that? Did I capture half of that, maybe?
I think that's a huge question. It's a huge question, and wow. It's really, there's so much resource-specific training that is available and is not necessarily being accessed. There's NEPA training that's available, not being accessed universally. I mean, a lot of people are getting great training, and there are a lot of great trainings out there. I don't know how to answer that question. I know that, I've been living in the NEPA world for much of my career, half of my career. Before that, I was in the wildlife world, but that was a long time ago. I would like to see more just basic NEPA training being accessed. It's offered, but I think it would help everybody to understand, all the resource specialists to understand the planning process. I also think it's really important for the planners to understand all the resources. More and more we're seeing planners coming in from a non-resource background, and we're a multidisciplinary agency, and somehow we've got to bring all that together. I'm totally not answering your question. I'm just reinforcing why it's a question.
And I'll only add one more thing, is I think that there is trainings out there, but they're a little stovepiped. We have silvicultural certification processes, and other resources that I'm less familiar with have other processes, but we need to integrate those, because the wildlife biologist and the forester and the fisheries biologist all need to know what an RV is and how to describe it accurately. And I don't think we're quite there. So I think an overarching prioritization with the staff we do have, and a plan on how to train the right people in the right places is needed.
Well, I think it is very important, and there's so many levels you can do training, and for me on the Willamette, I meet with our planners every couple months, and we have topics we discuss. So, it's a personal level, it's your resource, it's NEPA more general. I do encourage training in different disciplines, I mean, we have so much available. And, that's the fun part. Learning new stuff. That's why I like being a planner, because I get to learn about all the resources. That's great stuff. And so we do have a lot available. It's having your supervisor support you in your training. Talking to somebody who's done it before. What do you think is important for me to learn to be effective in my job? So it works both ways as well. On the personal level, on what your future, what do you plan to do, but being a well-rounded resource individual is really important. So you have to reach out as well as, you ask the hard questions. It's like, I like to do this.
I guess I'll just add real quick. So yeah, I think it's just good that we take advantage of where people's different backgrounds lie, because like I said, like you mentioned, that sometimes our planners come from different backgrounds. Like for me, I'm a forester underlying my being a planner, and you came from wildlife background. So we have, should take advantage of that and encourage our planners and employees to cross training is always great. I guess my one thing is always to remember that beyond that, everything's not NEPA. We throw everything with NEPA, but we have to remember about ESA and heritage and all those other things. Always remember to important all those other parts of the bigger planning process. And probably one other thing, which I know we've recognized as a need that's related to that, is the whole overall how we manage projects and do project management is another big thing that's on our list to work on for training too. So.
And that's all, folks. No, thank you, everybody, for your questions.